All glories to God. Please accept my humble obeisances. Harivilas. And we're going to continue in the introduction of the Bhagavad Gita, and we're on I'm on page 11 of the introduction of Bhagavad Gita. It might be a different page on the one that you have, but anyway, you can recognize from what I read. So Prabhupada writes, the supreme conscious Ishvara is similar to the living entity in this way. Both the consciousness of the Lord and that of the living entity are transcendental. It is not that the consciousness is generated by the association of matter. That is a mistaken idea. The theory that consciousness develops under certain circumstances of material combination is not accepted in Bhagavad Gita. Consciousness may be pervertedly reflected by the covering of material circumstances, just as light reflected through colored glass may appear to be a certain color. But the consciousness of the Lord is not materially
mute with her.
It says, Maya Dakshina Prakriti. When he descends into the material universe, his consciousness is not materially affected. If he were still affected, he would be unfit to speak on transcendental matters as he does in the Bhagavad Gita. One cannot say anything about the transcendental world without being free from materially contaminated consciousness. So, the Lord is not materially contaminated. Our consciousness at the present moment, however, is materially contaminated. The Bhagavad Gita teaches that we have to purify this materially contaminated consciousness. In pure consciousness, our actions will be dovetailed to the will of Ishvara or Krishna, and that will make us happy. It is not that we have to cease all activities. Rather, our activities are to be purified, and purified activities are called bhakti. Activities in bhakti appear to be like ordinary activities, but they are not contaminated. An ignorant person may see that a devotee is acting or working like an ordinary man, but such a person with a poor fund of knowledge does not know that the activities of the devotee or of the Lord are not contaminated by impure consciousness or matter. They are transcendental to the three modes of nature. We should know, however, that at this point, our consciousness is contaminated. When we are materially contaminated, we are called conditioned. False consciousness is exhibited under the impression that I am a product of material nature. This is called false ego. One who is absorbed in the thought of bodily consciousness cannot understand his situation. Bhagavad Gita was spoken to liberate one from the bodily conception of life. And Arjuna put himself in this position in order to receive this information from the Lord. One must become free from the bodily conception of life. That is the preliminary activity for the transcendentalist. Let me read that again. One must become free from the bodily conception of life. That is the preliminary activity for the transcendentalist. One who wants to become free, who wants to become liberated, must first of all learn that he is not this material body. Mukti, or liberation, means freedom from material consciousness. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, also, the definition of liberation is given. Muktir hit vanyata rupam swarupena yavastiti. Mukti means liberation from the contaminated consciousness of this material world and situation in pure consciousness. All the instructions of Bhagavad Gita are intended to awaken this pure consciousness. And therefore, we find at the last stage of the Gita's instructions that Krishna is asking Arjuna whether he is now in purified consciousness. Purified consciousness means acting in accordance with the instructions of the Lord. This is the whole sum and substance of purified consciousness. Consciousness is already there because we are part and parcel of the Lord. But for us, there is the affinity of being affected by the inferior modes. But the Lord, being the Supreme, is never affected. That is the difference between the Supreme Lord and the small individual souls. So this is really wonderful information Prabhupada is giving. And when he says all the instructions of Bhagavad Gita are intended to awaken this pure consciousness, and therefore we find at the last stage of the Gita's instructions that Krishna is asking Arjuna whether he is now in purified consciousness. So purified consciousness means you act according to the instructions of the Lord. So if we have a spiritual master and we have Krishna, so whatever Krishna says, the bona fide spiritual master repeats. That's how you know he's a bona fide spiritual master, because he only repeats what Krishna has taught. And if we follow Krishna's instructions, that's a sign that we have purified consciousness, meaning we're following Krishna's instructions given to us originally by Krishna and repeated by bona fide gurus. And in this way, we're not contaminated. Contaminated consciousness is when we have many attachments to sense gratification. And therefore, we're not so, let's say, enthusiastic about following the rules and regulations of Krishna consciousness, but rather we're more interested in engaging in sense gratification. So when it says, all the instructions of Bhagavad Gita are intended to awaken this pure consciousness. And therefore, we find at the last stage of the Gita instructions that Krishna is asking Arjuna whether he is now in purified consciousness. Well, if he's in purified consciousness, that means he's ready to follow all the instructions given by Krishna. Purified consciousness means acting in accordance with the instructions of the Lord. This is the whole sum and substance of purified consciousness. So you have Krishna, who is instructing Arjuna. You have spiritual master who's repeating what Krishna said to Arjuna. You have yourself, if you want to be, let's say, a bona fide devotee, you have to also repeat what your spiritual master has said, which is the same as what Krishna has said. So this means that you're in the parampara, the cyclic succession. You do not deviate from what Krishna originally said, what the acharyas have repeated, and what your spiritual master has repeated. The way to know the difference between a real spiritual master and a phony spiritual master is when the spiritual master deviates from what the original words of Krishna and the acharyas have said. Then you know there's a disconnect. So, to be a bona fide disciple, you have to first learn what Krishna has originally said and what has been repeated by bona fide acharyas. Then you can recognize if the present guru is bona fide or is deviating. If you don't, so that's the education that we get. The first thing is when you join Krishna consciousness, you begin hearing what Krishna has said and what is being repeated by bona fide devotees. A devotee who doesn't repeat what Krishna says is not bona fide. So, but how do you know if he's bona fide or not? It's because you are first educated in what Krishna has said. That's why we have Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita is Krishna speaking about who he is and explaining so many things that are bona fide statements. If you get Bhagavad Gita as it is, you are associating directly with Krishna. You're associating through the sound vibration of Krishna's instructions. And it's very important that neophyte devotees are educated like that. Then, if the spiritual master deviates by saying something different than what Krishna said, the disciple can know right away and not be fooled. But let's take a look at someone like Sadhguru. He says, I don't read the scriptures. So right away, he stops you from being able to determine whether he's speaking bona fide things or not, because he rejects the parampara and the fact that he doesn't read the scriptures. And it's very clever to say that. Also, he said once before, he said, I haven't come here to say that I am God. I've come here to say that you are God. So again, he's being very, very clever. Those are not, but it's not definitely not a bona fide statement. But he can get away with it because from the beginning he rejects, he says clearly, I don't read scriptures. So that means whatever he says, either you're going to accept it or you're going to reject it. Well, you should reject it because a bona fide guru is someone who simply repeats what the previous acharyas, who also repeat what Krishna said originally. That's why they're that's why they're acharyas. They're simply repeating what Krishna has said. They don't deviate. Whereas the Sadhguru, he eliminates any way of finding out what is the truth by saying, I don't read scriptures. That means he doesn't believe in the authority of Krishna. Okay, so there we'll continue. It says, activities in bhakti appear to be like ordinary activities, but they are not contaminated. An ignorant person may see that a devotee is acting or working like an ordinary man. But such a person with a poor fund of knowledge does not know that the activities of the devotee or of the Lord are not contaminated by impure consciousness or matter. They are transcendental to the three modes of nature. We should know, however, that at this point, our consciousness is contaminated. Okay, so yes, definitely, our consciousness is contaminated. However, now, when we are materially contaminated, we are called conditioned. False consciousness is exhibited under the impression that I am a product of material nature. This is called false ego. Well, you can say that 99% of people in this world have a false ego because they all think that they are their body is material. They don't necessarily, even if they believe in the soul, they identify, however, with the body rather than with the soul. Although they might talk about the soul, but they identify with the body. So, everybody has a soul. The soul is eternal, and the soul is spiritual. But, like, for example, you have what's called Protestants, you have Catholics, you have atheists, you have Unitarians, you have this religion, that religion. They talk about God, but they're attached to their material identity and body. Therefore, they don't really understand that their consciousness is contaminated. They don't understand it. So they're walking around with contaminated consciousness and preaching, but they think they're doing the right thing, but actually they're doing the wrong thing. You can't really be a preacher if you're not completely, if your consciousness is not completely pure. So as long as someone identifies with the body, even though they talk about the soul, they have to identify with the body and do not repeat what the original, let's say, statements are of Krishna. Now, let's say someone might say, well, wait a minute, what if they're a Christian, and their book is the Bible, it's not the Bhagavad Gita. Okay, fine. But even then, the followers of let's say, the Bible, let's say the New Testament, if they're bona fide, they're only going to repeat what Jesus said, right? And what Jesus did. And the Muslims, they're only going to repeat what's in the Quran, what was spoken by Ibrahim or Gabriel. Basically, the Quran is spoken by Gabriel, if I'm not mistaken. They call him Ibrahim. So they have to repeat those words, otherwise they're not bona fide. But there are definitely some mistakes in Islamic philosophy, and there's definitely some mistakes in Christian philosophy. And therefore, it turns out that many times the followers of Christianity and followers of Islam have a material concept of attachment to their body. Now, as far as devotees go, they can also have a material concept of attachment to the body unless they're properly educated and to understand, I am not this body. That's the first thing you have to learn if you want to have a spiritual life, not to identify with the body, but to identify with your soul, which is part and parcel of Krishna. So there's a major difference between the body and the soul. So here Prabhupada says, an ignorant person may see that a devotee is acting or working like an ordinary man, but such a person with a poor fund of knowledge does not know that the activities of the devotee or of the Lord are not contaminated by impure consciousness or matter. They are transcendental to the three modes of nature. That's goodness, passion, and ignorance. We should know, however, that at this point, our consciousness is contaminated. What time is it now?
Yeah, we have another 7 minutes.
When we are materially contaminated, we are called conditioned. False consciousness is exhibited under the impression that I am a product of material nature. This is called false ego. One who is absorbed in a thought of bodily conceptions cannot understand the situation. Bhagavad Gita was spoken to liberate one from the bodily conception of life. And Arjuna puts himself in this position in order to receive this information from the Lord. One must become free from the bodily conception of life. That is the preliminary activity for the transcendentals. One who wants to become free, who wants to become liberated, must first of all learn that he is not this material body. Mukti, or liberation, means freedom from material consciousness. Let's discuss that because it's a major point. In other words, unless we understand this point, we won't be able to function correctly as a devotee. So when we say that, or when Prabhupada says here, one must become free from the bodily conception of life. That is a preliminary activity for the transcendental. So when I joined the movement, I didn't understand this point in the beginning. But as I kept reading Bhagavad Gita, and I kept looking at this point over and over again, and finally I realized what this means. It means that although I'm born in a specific family, which is is part of a specific identification of religion and race and so forth, all those things that they identify with are false. And it's hard to admit that. It's hard to admit, like in my case, it was hard to admit that I am not an Armenian, because it looks like, I'm violating my family's tradition, I'm violating this, I'm violating that. But I realized, wait a minute, if I want to be devotee, and what am I reading here? One who wants to become free, who wants to become liberated, must first of all learn that he is not this material body. So that hit me like a big heavy rock. It hit me on the head when I read that verse. And that means that I had to deny everything that I believed, more or less. But everything I believed was based on the bodily conception of life. And everybody has a bodily conception of life. And you have people that are Irish, and you have people that are Germans, and you have people that are Russians, and you have people that are Americans, and everyone's has a certain bodily conception of who they are. But actually, it's false. But to actually accept that it's false, it's very difficult for many people, and they think but the main point is that without, as it says here, one who wants to become free, who wants to become liberated, must first of all learn that he is not this material body. First point about spiritual life. So, if I'm not this material body, then what am I exactly? I'm the soul, which is I have my own individual soul, which is eternal. It is not American or Latino or this or that. It is the part and parcel of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We're all coming from Krishna. We're never separated from Krishna, but we might be in a state of illusion thinking we are. And when we are part and parcel of Krishna, then our real duty in life is to serve Krishna. Very simple. Just like you think, oh, I'm a member of this party or that party, then you're obliged to serve them. But the only thing we're obliged to do is to serve Krishna. If you serve anything else, you're going to be misled. So there's so many things that you can serve. You can serve the atheists, and you can serve the communists, and you can serve this is or that ism. But the only thing we should really serve is Krishna and Krishna consciousness and Krishna's teachings. So one who wants to become free, who wants to become liberated, must first of all learn that he is not this material body. Mukti or liberation means freedom from material consciousness. In Srimad Bhagavatam, also the definition of liberation is given. Muktir yata rupam swarupina yatas vyat vastiti. Mukti means liberation from the contaminated consciousness of this material world and situated in pure consciousness. All the instructions of Bhagavad Gita are intended to awaken this pure consciousness. And therefore, we find at the last stage of the Gita's instructions that Krishna is asking Arjuna whether he is now in purified consciousness. Purified consciousness means acting in accordance with the instructions of the Lord. This is the whole sum and substance of purified consciousness. Consciousness is already there because we are part and parcel of the Lord. But for us, there is the affinity of being affected by the inferior modes. But the Lord, being the Supreme, is never affected. That is the difference between the Supreme Lord and the small individual souls. So, this is our lesson today. Consciousness is something, everyone is conscious. Everybody has consciousness. But when the consciousness is directed toward a relationship with Krishna, it's pure. And when it's directed to mundane family members or some type of ism or some type of concept or philosophy or this or that, then it's contaminated. And especially, if it's some kind of sense gratification, definitely contaminated. So, therefore, the beginning of spiritual life is where we learn this. That the whole sum and substance of purified consciousness is that we are all part and parcel of Krishna. And then, as being part and parcel of Krishna, that means that we're obliged to serve the Lord. If we just understand that, that's the whole philosophy, let's put it like that.
Mm-hmm.
If you think, no, I'm part and parcel of my family, and this is what they do, they eat chicken every Sunday, and they do this and do that, and this is our religion, we go to this church or that church. So that type of consciousness will keep us in the material world over and over again. But if we identify as the eternal servant of Krishna and we engage in devotional service, loving service to please Krishna, we become liberated from this false consciousness and our consciousness becomes purified. Purified means no longer attached to anything material. And as it says here, purified consciousness means acting in accordance with the instructions of the Lord. This is the whole sum and substance of purified consciousness. Consciousness is already there because we are part and parcel of the Lord, but for us, there is the affinity of being affected by the inferior modes. But the Lord, being the Supreme, is never affected. That is the difference between the Supreme Lord and the small individual souls. What is this consciousness?
It's time.
Time. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, are there any questions?
Hare Krishna, any questions online?
Yeah, Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Yes, Prabhu. You can.
So, Hare Krishna Maharaj, my mother wanted to ask a question, so I will translate from Hindi to English on her behalf. So she wanted to know, as you have mentioned, that we are not this body, we are soul. But when we get hurt, when body get hurt, we get a lot of pain. So at that time, we feel like we are this body, we are getting a lot of pain. So how to understand this in such situations that we are soul?
Well, let's first understand what is pain. Pain is a message. What's the message? The message is we have done something wrong, but we don't know what it is. We forgot. So pain is to help us to understand that somewhere we made some mistakes. And it's a wake-up call that we have to analyze what we did wrong. Now, if we can't do that, we can't remember, or we're not sure what it is that we did wrong, and because of that, we have this karma by which we're having pain, then we have to go to a bona fide devotee to get the answer. Because pain is a wake-up call that we have done something wrong, either in this life or in previous lives. Now, if you say, well, if we say, well, it happened in previous lives, so there's no way I can remember what it is. No, we can understand what it is. We violated some principles of Krishna consciousness. And because of that, now we got this karmic reaction and we're in pain. So the way to correct that is to now follow Krishna consciousness very seriously. And then you'll see that the pain and suffering goes away. And now you can understand that the reason you had pain or having pain is because you did something wrong previously. Now you're getting a karmic reaction for it. And when you start doing everything that is right, it goes away. And you are, let's say, free of that bad karma. So some people say, well, yeah, but I have a congenital, let's say, disease or part of my body is paralyzed since I was born, and so forth. Well, that means that you have some very serious karma. But it doesn't stop you from becoming Krishna conscious. So when you take up chanting Hare Krishna seriously, you will see that those handicaps that you have no longer inhibit you from having a very intense spiritual life. In fact, it might be an impetus for a very intense spiritual life. And once you get involved spiritually, following the regulative principles, many, many wonderful things happen. So we have to not be afraid of pain, but we should be afraid of committing sinful activities, which is what's going to cause us to suffer. And by engaging in devotional service, we can eliminate little by little all those bad karmas that we have, and then live a peaceful life by which we can always be Krishna conscious and go back to God. That makes sense?
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Yes, yes, Maharaj. Thank you, Maharaj.
Always remember that pain and suffering is a message that we have done something wrong. Haribol.
Thank you, Maharaj. Hare Krishna.
Any other questions? If not, we'll see you in the morning. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.